Now let's get to today's story. In the quiet, pre-dawn hours when the city still sleeps, I often sit by the window of my rented apartment on the 40th floor and watch as the first rays of sunlight paint Chicago skyscrapers in shades of pink and gold. It's in these moments when silence rings in my ears and coffee grows cold in my cup that I allow myself to remember. To remember how 3 years ago began the story of my meteoric rise and even more meteoric fall. You know, sometimes I think that success is the most insidious temptation in a person's life. When you're young, ambitious, and full of energy, it seems like the whole world lies at your feet. That's exactly how I was then, a 26-year-old Finance Academy graduate with a sparkle in my eyes and grandiose plans for the future. My name is Zach, and this is the story of my greatest fall, a story about how the pursuit of success destroyed my family and nearly broke my life. It all began at the brokerage company Midwest Trading Solutions, a small office with 20 workstations, dozens of monitors with flickering charts, the smell of coffee, and an atmosphere of constant tension. I was the youngest trader on the team, and that made me work twice as hard as everyone else. I arrived earlier than anyone at 6:30 a.m. when the cleaners were still wiping down the desks, left last, often staying until midnight, studying charts and analyzing trades. Mark, my first mentor, often said, "Zach, you have instinct, but instinct without discipline is a direct path to ruin." I absorbed his every word, every piece of advice. Learn to read charts like books, to feel market movements with my whole. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night with a clear understanding of what trade needed to be made in the morning. The first serious success came after 8 months. I predicted a sharp drop in the technology sector stocks a day before it happened. My intuition and sleepless nights over charts brought the company $500,000 in net profit. After that, I was promoted to junior trader, given a separate desk with 6 monitors, and had my trading limits increased. That's when I met Emily. It was at a charity evening for financiers at the Drake Hotel. She stood by the bar in an elegant black dress, enthusiastically discussing something with her friends. Our eyes met, and the world seemed to stop. I had never believed in love at first sight, but at that moment I knew she was special. Emily turned out to be the complete opposite of the typical golden youth from Chicago's financial world. Smart, well-read, with an amazing sense of humor, and yet surprisingly modest, the daughter of renowned financial consultant Deborah Mitchell. She could have gotten a cushy position in any company, but preferred to work as a high school math teacher. Our romance developed rapidly. Within a month, we were living together, and after 6 months, I proposed. I remember that evening at the restaurant on the 96th floor of the John Hancock Center. How my hands trembled as I took out the ring, how her eyes shone when she said yes. Deborah, her mother, was initially wary of me. No wonder who was I. Just an ordinary trader without significant wealth, without connections in high society, without an impressive pedigree. At family dinners, she politely inquired about my success, but doubt could be read in her eyes. That for her, I wasn't good enough for her daughter. The wedding was modest but elegant. Emily insisted. We spent our honeymoon in a small town on the Italian coast where no one knew about quotations and stock market indices. It was the happiest time of my life. Then I thought only happiness awaited us ahead. How naive we were. The first year of married life flew by like one day. We bought a spacious apartment in a prestigious area, started planning for children. At work, I got access to larger trades. My annual bonus doubled. Life seemed to be working out. Everything was going according to plan. And then the market crash happened. No one saw it coming. Neither experienced analysts nor seasoned traders. That Black Tuesday, I lost more than $2 million on trades. Not my own, the company's. But that didn't make it any easier. I nearly lost my job, only saved by my previously spotless reputation. But they cut my limits and canceled bonuses. And all this happened exactly when Emily was 7 months pregnant. We had just taken out a mortgage on a house in the suburbs. I had gotten into debt to pay the down payment. I remember sitting in the kitchen at night trying to figure out where to get money for the next payment. And then, unexpectedly, Deborah appeared with an offer that changed everything. "Zach," she said, then inviting me to lunch at an expensive restaurant. You have potential, but you need an experienced mentor. I can be that mentor free of charge. I looked at her with disbelief. Deborah Mitchell was a legend in Chicago's financial circles. People paid tens of thousands of dollars for her consultations. Her predictions came true with frightening accuracy. And now she's offering to be my mentor. Why? Was all I could ask. She smiled. Because your family and because I see a spark of real talent in you, it would be a shame to waste it. I agreed without thinking. What fool would refuse such an offer? I thought it was a gift from fate, a chance to get back in the game, to provide for my family. If only I had known how it would all end. If only I could have foreseen what price I would have to pay for this chance. Our lessons with Deborah began a week after little Ethan's birth. I remember my first visit to her home office, a spacious room on the second floor of a Victorian mansion in Gold Coast, massive oak desk, leather armchairs, walls paneled in dark wood. The perfect place for making serious decisions. The first rule of a successful trader. No emotions, she said then, elegantly gesturing for me to take the chair opposite. She wore expensive perfume, a light, barely perceptible aroma with notes of sandalwood. The second rule, always have a plan. And the third, know when to break that plan when intuition demands it. I came 3 times a week, usually after 7 in the evening, when Emily was putting the baby to bed. Deborah proved to be an amazing teacher. She didn't just share knowledge, she opened up a completely new world of financial markets to me. The way she read charts was more like art than science. "Look, Zach," she would say, leaning over the monitor. "See this candlestick? It tells a whole story. Market fear, greed, uncertainty, it's all here." Her hair would sometimes brush my shoulder when she leaned closer to show something on the screen. In such moments, I found myself holding my. Gradually, our meetings became longer. We could talk until deep into the night, forgetting about time. After analyzing charts, we often switched to discussing other topics: art, politics, philosophy. Deborah turned out to be a brilliant conversationalist with a sharp mind and unexpected sense of humor. Emily didn't object to our late sessions. "I'm so glad you finally found common ground," she would say, me before bed. She was completely absorbed in caring for the baby and seemed not to notice how the atmosphere between me and her mother was changing. But changes were happening imperceptibly, subtly, but inexorably. First, I caught myself admiring the elegant curve of Deborah's neck when she worked at the computer, then counting the minutes until our next meeting. Her voice, her laugh, even the way she held her coffee cup, everything suddenly became filled with some special meaning. At 45, Deborah looked stunning. Daily yoga and tennis had kept her figure perfect. She dressed with impeccable taste, no flashy outfits, only elegant suits and dresses that emphasized her assets without the slightest vulgarity. But most importantly, her eyes, dark brown with golden sparkles. They seemed to look straight into your soul. I tried to fight this obsession, reminded myself about Emily, about our son, about the fact that Deborah was my mother-in-law, that all this was wrong and unacceptable. But the more I resisted these thoughts, the more persistently they returned. One evening, when we were analyzing a particularly complex strategy, I accidentally her hand. Something like an electric shock passed between us. We both froze for a moment, then pretended nothing had happened. But from that moment on, something changed definitively. I began to notice how her behavior changed in my presence. She started wearing more revealing outfits to our meetings. He, seemingly accidental, became more frequent. When she leaned over the desk to show something in the charts, I could feel the warmth of her, and it drove me crazy. We increasingly got distracted from work, talking about personal matters. She talked about her marriage, about how hard it was raising Emily alone after the divorce, about years of loneliness dedicated to her career. Her voice took on special notes when she spoke about unfulfilled dreams and missed opportunities. "You know, Zach," she said one day, thoughtfully, looking out the window, "sometimes I think I built my life wrong. Always put success above personal happiness. And now, She didn't finish the phrase, but her look said more than any words. Our conversations became increasingly personal. Increasingly. We seemed to be moving in a spiral, with each turn coming closer to something forbidden and inevitable. The air in the office seemed to thicken with unspoken desires and suppressed emotions. I started inventing reasons for additional meetings, consulted with her by phone, sent messages late at night, supposedly asking advice about trades. She always responded, and in her answers, ambiguous hints appeared more and more frequently. We both understood we were walking on the edge of an abyss, understood that what was happening between us was wrong and dangerous. But we couldn't stop anymore. Like moths flying to a flame, we continued our path toward inevitable catastrophe. And then came that fateful Friday. Friday, May 13th. This date is forever etched in my memory. The day began as usual. Morning trading meetings, calls to clients. The markets were in chaos. Asian indices had crashed following China's unexpected interest rate decision. European markets were in turmoil. I lost track of time trying to maintain my investors' positions. Emily messaged me in the afternoon saying she was going to a friend's place with Ethan for the weekend. "You need to work with Mom on that complicated market situation," she wrote. "Don't want the babies crying to disturb you." A pang of guilt reading these caring lines. If only she knew. In the evening, I arrived at Deborah's. Her mansion seemed strangely quiet, as if waiting for something. Deborah opened the door wearing a black silk dress I'd never seen before. "Tough day?" she asked with a slight smile. She wore new perfume, more intense and sensual than usual. "Let's go to the office," she added. "We have a lot to discuss." We analyzed charts for several hours, like I was in a fog. Deborah's proximity, her perfume, the way she occasionally my hand while pointing at something on the screen. All of this created almost unbearable tension. "I think we need a break," she said around 10 o'clock, rising from the desk. "I have some excellent red wine from that trip to Bordeaux. Remember I told you about it?" She moved around the room with feline grace, and I couldn't take my eyes off her. The drink was indeed exceptional, tart, with notes of blackcurrant and vanilla. We sat in armchairs by the fireplace, talking about nothing in particular. The light was dimmed, flames flickered in our wine glasses, reality somehow blurring at the edges. "You know, Zach," Deborah suddenly said, looking into my eyes over her glass, "sometimes life gives us a second chance, a chance to feel alive, young, desired." Her fingers slid along my hand as she took my empty glass. That was like a spark igniting a powder keg. I don't remember who made the first move. I only remember her eyes, dark, alluring, dangerous. Remember how her hands trembled as she unbuttoned my shirt. Remember the taste of wine on her. Everything that happened next merged into a kaleidoscope of sensations and emotions. The heat of her skin, her passion like I'd never experienced before. Fierce, all-consuming, burning away all thoughts and doubts. We made love like possessed people. On the office couch, then in her bedroom, as if trying to make up for all those months of restrained desire. All those nights when we dreamed of this, but didn't dare admit it even to ourselves. It was madness. Beautiful and terrible at the same time. Only toward dawn, when the first rays of sunlight began penetrating through the curtains, did reality crash down on me with all its weight. I lay in my mother-in-law's bed, inhaling the scent of her perfume from my skin and the ground disappearing from under my feet. Next to the bedside table stood a photograph, Emily with little Ethan in her arms. They smiled at the camera, so happy, so innocent. A wave of nausea hit me. What had I done? How could I? The image of my wife and son stood before my eyes, tearing my heart apart. Deborah met me in the kitchen, impeccably dressed and composed as if nothing had happened. "Coffee?" she asked calmly, but I noticed how her hands trembled as she poured the drink. In the morning light, everything that had happened seemed especially wrong, almost unreal. "We need to talk," I began, but she interrupted me. "No, Zach, we don't. This was a mistake. A beautiful, wonderful mistake, but still a mistake. No one must ever know. Her voice was firm, but pain could be read in her eyes. We agreed to forget that night, pretend nothing had happened, return to our previous mentor-student relationship. How naive we were. I should have understood then that some bells cannot be silenced, some genies cannot be put back in their bottles. Leaving her house, I stood on the street for a long time looking at the brightening sky. The spring air was fresh and clean, early birds sang somewhere. The world seemed the same as always, but I knew nothing would ever be the same. That night I had crossed a line, past the point of no return, and the price of this step would prove unimaginably high. They say time heals all wounds. A lie. Time only drives the pain deeper, turning sharp agony into a dull, constant weight somewhere under your ribs. The weeks following that night became the most torturous period of my life. Every morning started the same way. I would wake up in cold sweat seconds before the alarm. My first thought was always of her, Deborah, her scent, her voice, and then would come the wave of shame and self-disgust. I couldn't look in the mirror, couldn't meet my own reflection's gaze. Emily suspected nothing. She was still the loving wife, caring, tender, attentive, every from her burned like hot iron, when she me in the mornings, like the ultimate traitor. "You seem so tense lately," she would say with concern. "Maybe we should see a therapist." Effects of work stress. Work, the only place where I could distract myself somewhat. I threw myself into trading completely, spending 12 to 14 hours in front of monitors, took every possible trade, analyzed markets to exhaustion, anything to avoid thinking, remembering. With Deborah, we tried to maintain professional relations. Our meetings became strictly business. No extra conversation, no wine, no fireside chats. She maintained herself perfectly, elegant, reserved, professional. Only sometimes, when our eyes met accidentally, something flickered in her gaze that made my catch. Family dinners became an exquisite torture. Sitting at the same table, maintaining casual conversation, watching Deborah play with her grandson. "Mom, you're just glowing lately,"